You're with Julian on the Brown Note and a film review for the first time in ages, and a relatively new film released this year. Was it this year? Yep, in January. So 28 years later, The Bone Temple. So Danny Boyle and Alex Garland got back together with the old gang after 28 days later became a very iconic and influential film at the start of the century, which kick-started this incredibly persistent new wave of zombie product, from The Walking Dead to a countless number of movies, and very ably followed that up. I don't think Danny Boyle directed the follow-up, but produced it, which was 28 weeks later. And then, it all went dormant, and Boyle and Garland got back together and did 28 years later, which I thought was actually really good. Didn't rely on the previous two films, completely shifted the style of everything that was happening as well. So not reliant on, the zombie apocalypse so much as humans. And both these films are heavily reliant on the human stories. And this time it was 28 years later, but set up in an island somewhere off the coast where human communities had learnt to live with the zombies. And basically were in enclaves and hiding and often attacked if they went out into the wilderness. Looked very, very good. And a human element that was massively amplified by the character played by Alfie Williams, his mum dying of cancer, and them going to see the guy who's the Bone Temple guy, which was Ralph Fiennes, who we think is a maniac who destroys zombies and boils their skulls. But then we find out he's this hugely empathetic person, possibly the only one on planet Earth that even cares about them and treats them as though they were once humans, and actually gives them a memorial, which is this incredible set of the Bone Temples, which is an amazing thing to look at, and was a really empathetic guy as well, living out there on his own. So we have a direct follow-up. So the last film ended with the Alfie character being a young kid, the Ralph Fiennes doctor character putting his mum to sleep. She was in the last weeks of her life, and Alfie going off into the wilderness. And the one stumble in that film, because it jarringly was out of place, was the very last sequence, which only lasted a couple of minutes. And that was the Jimmy Savile gang that appeared. So there was this gang that appeared to rescue the Alfie character, or called Spike, I believe, who they appeared doing like it was in a kung fu movie. It didn't really fit with the film. And that's where we start with this film, which is the gang leader, Jack O'Connell, who's excellent in this film, as Sir Lord Jimmy Crystal, has a gang of tracksuit wearing Jimmy Savile dressed people that roam the countryside. Now, we thought that they might be nice in the first film. In the opening sequence, we see the Spike character, who's a young boy, very small, not a strong kid, having to fight to the death with one of the Jimmy Savile gang. Just because that's how they do business. And it's pretty nasty, but not as nasty as the film actually gets. Once he actually kills by accident the much bigger opponent he faces, he's then given a wig and a tracksuit. And we find out something I thought was quite interesting, which was the gang themselves. There's the most successful elements of this film are the ones that widen the scope of the world that this film exists in, and the notion that when the zombie apocalypse happened, that there would be people who were religious that believed that it was Armageddon apocalypse, Satan coming back to rule the earth and stuff like that. This is a gang of Satanists. So they were not the nice people we thought they might be in the first film. They actually think that they're working for Satan. They think that Satan has come to Earth and he caused the zombie apocalypse. Possibly not that far-fetched, but they go around murdering people in the most horrific way they can. That's something that stood out quite a lot in this film, because they're at times a little bit goofy and silly, but the brutality of the way that they strip the flesh off people and murder them is kind of like Last House on the Left nasty. It's really bad, and a lot of people would turn it off. because there's some very, very, very nasty violence. So this film is the narrowest in scope of the films. It basically features the Jimmy Savile gang on their way to meet up with Ralph Fiennes at the Bone Temple. And they believe that Ralph Fiennes might actually be Satan, because he's got this huge temple all around him of bones and skulls, which is, in his head, honouring the dead. But in their eyes, he's covered in iodine to ward off any effects of the virus that is causing people to turn into zombies, which gives him this reddish hue. And so some of the members of this Jimmy Savile gang are convinced that he actually is Satan. So they go out to try and meet him. Jack O'Connell's excellent as Lord Jimmy Crystal, the leader of the gang, a hypocrite and a liar, but genuinely believes that Satan is his father. And he actually genuinely believes that Ralph Fiennes might be his father. So we all get to this sort of climax of the Jimmy Savile gang and Ralph Fiennes meeting. There are downtimes in the movie, and I found like the way they murdered the farmers in this farmhouse group of people to be excessively vulgar and violent. Not that I am against that kind of thing in films. I just felt like they were a bit too nasty for the film. It was like really bad, like as bad as A Driller Killer or Last House on the Left bad. It was nasty stuff, and a lot of people would probably turn off from that. But I did like the notion of them, you know, like how bad they were on some levels. I found it a bit difficult to believe that their gang was so all-powerful. They took down this house of about 5 adults with not much more themselves. So sometimes they seem to exert more power than you would probably give them in real life. I thought that, you know, the Jack O'Connor character actually expands in complexity. Once he meets Ralph Fiennes, it becomes very interesting. And the whole notion that he's a cult leader and has to be consistent with his followers who are waiting for any chink in his armour was really interesting. The film's high point is undoubtedly Ralph Fiennes. Ralph Fiennes is going through an Indian summer in his career. Some of his best and most interesting roles in recent times. The Conclave was a great role, but he's done quite a few. And his soulfulness in this film was a real high point, I thought. I thought maybe it was sort of flagging in some directions, but there's no doubt the final third, when they actually meet up with Ralph Fiennes, is the best part of the movie. And you've got to have someone like Danny Boyle on board to go as gonzo as they went. You stare at the screen not knowing if it's the worst thing you've ever seen or the best thing you've ever seen when Ralph Fiennes is dancing in flames to Iron Maiden's 666 Number of the Beast. It's an incredible sequence. You're like, is this terrible or is this absolute genius? And you don't really know. I thought all of that whole sequence in the final third was beautiful. And the other real standout here is Samson, played by Chi Lewis Parry. So in the first film, we got this giant zombie, a new zombie, an alpha zombie, who was ripping people's heads off and their spines, and naked from the waist down, with a giant appendage. It was quite something. And he's a new one. And the secondary story, apart from the Jimmy Savile gang, is the fact that Ralph Fiennes always tries to find the humanity behind the zombie, to see if the human being is in there. And he uses these heroin darts or morphine darts to subdue them. And he realizes that this alpha keeps coming back to him for that. He's incapacitated by these morphine darts, but he wants that. So he turns up on a daily basis and starts not attacking Ralph Fiennes, who becomes more and more comfortable in his presence. And the two end up hanging out on morphine, which is quite something. And he, in the end, does find out that there are people behind the zombie, that the illness that they've got is actually psychotic as well as physical, and that he ends up being able to give him some medication to calm him down and bring him back to being able to say rudimentary words. This is definitely a middle film, as there are a lot of threads here that are, excuse me, going to carry over into the next film, such as the pregnant woman that escapes and has absolutely no impact on the story. Obviously, she's going to turn up in the future, and Samson is obviously going to turn up. He's a great character. So overall, I thought this was really interesting. I love the way it recontextualized the notion of the zombies. It gave the zombies back their humanity, the fact that maybe they could possibly be cured, and that maybe the human mind was behind some illness inside them. Ralph Fiennes says, the way that you're acting towards babies and kids and so on, what are you seeing when you attack them? The fact that they might be going through some kind of psychosis to make them behave in this manner and so on. And the final third is just absolutely fabulous. But it does have some downsides, and some of the violence of the attacks on humans is excessive, completely excessive. But they are supposed to be Satanists. It's just a bit hard to take the Jimmy Savile gang seriously as Satanists. They're a bit goofy. Happily, Jack O'Connell... It's not 100 million miles away from the role Jack O'Connell played in Sinners as the leader of the vampires. Ironically, he is much, much more evil than the vampire leader in Sinners, who was kind of okay in some ways. So I'm going to give 28 years later, The Bone Temple, not for everyone due to very extreme violence. And it's occasionally downtimes, but still overall ends on a fascinating moment that does actually make you want to see more. So the Bone Temple, I'm going to give an 8 out of 10 to